Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. We appreciate you taking the time to be part of this webinar focused on directors and officers liability insurance. And it's also commonly referred to as D&O insurance. My name is Tony McCroskey, and I'm with Granite Insurance. Today we're going to discuss D&O coverage and how it's becoming increasingly important for home care agencies, franchise owners, executives, board members, and management teams. As healthcare and home care organizations continue to face increased regulatory scrutiny, employment-related claims, financial pressures, and government responsibilities, leadership liability or management liability, as we're going to call it, exposures are growing rapidly. And today's webinar is designed to help you understand what D&O insurance actually covers, why private companies and healthcare organizations need it, common claims scenarios, coverage gaps that many organizations may overlook, how directors and officers works alongside other insurance policies that the business or organization may carry, best practices for reducing executive liability exposure. We'll also leave time at the end for a few questions. So let's get started. Let's begin with the basics. Directors and officers liability insurance protects the personal assets of directors, officers, executives, and sometimes the organization itself when claims are made alleging wrongful acts in the management of the company. That seems pretty reasonable. These claims can come from employees, competitors, vendors, investors, government agencies, clients or family members, franchise systems, regulatory bodies. A wrongful act can include mismanagement, breach of fiduciary duty, failure to comply with regulations, misrepresentation, negligent supervision, improper hiring or firing decisions, financial mismanagement, government failures. All these things we hear about more and more, and it's just becoming an ever-increasing topic. And also, here's the real point of emphasis. Attorneys are now looking at ways to make their complaints so that management liability becomes in play. And management liability includes directors and officers, as well as employment practices liability, fiduciary liability coverage, crime, kidnapping, ransom, and cyber. These are all considered management liability cover policies. And all of you should know as a right at home agency that employment practices coverage you already are required to carry, as well as crime and also cyber. So you have some exposure to management liability insurance already, but this is going to be a little bit deeper dive on directors and officers liability insurance. And as I understand it, right at home does not currently require its franchisees to carry directors and officers coverage. But I'm going to show you why I think that may be something you would want to consider for yourself and your agency, just to protect yourself. One important thing to understand about directors and officers and policies is that they're primarily designed to protect leadership decisions, not bodily injury or professional negligence. We typically think of policies that protect us from general liability or professional liability acts. And while those are definitely needed, directors and officers focuses on management liability, and specifically the liability and even personal liability of the firm's directors and officers. Why do home care agencies need directors and officers coverage? Many privately owned home care agencies mistakenly believe that they don't need directors and officers liability. They believe it's for publicly traded corporations only. That is not true. In today's environment, privately owned healthcare and home care organizations face substantial management liability exposures. Home care organizations operate in a highly regulated environment involving employment law compliance, wage and hour concerns, caregiver and staffing challenges. Boy, you see a lot of those, I'm sure. HIPAA and privacy obligations, licensing requirements, franchise obligations, vendor relationships, financial oversight, rapid growth of your organization, As an organization grows, so does the potential for disputes involving leadership decisions and therefore the directors and officers liability exposures. Even if a claim has little or no merit, the defense costs alone can be unbelievable. Defense costs, like employment practices liability, is probably the larger piece of the claims that we see. Now, with the directors and officers, when there's an actual claim that goes to settlement, sometimes those claims can be substantial and be even more than the defense. But defense costs are still, well, defense cost period is always going to be more than what we would expect. D&O coverage also helps for settlement payments, judgments, protection for individual executives, balance sheet protection for the company. You want to strengthen the balance sheet of your company, by directors and officers liability coverage. All right, let's take a look at the duties of the directors and officers. Directors and officers are expected to perform their duties in good faith and at a level of professionalism they believe to be in the best interest of the corporation and with the care that a reasonably prudent person in a similar situation would use under similar circumstances. Basically, we're supposed to do the right thing. We're supposed to be loyal, and we're supposed to show a duty of care. Directors and officers are prohibited from using their positions to further or enhance their private interests and are required to refrain from engaging in personal activities which might hinder the corporation or compete against the corporation. And they cannot transact business with the corporation unless they can demonstrate prior to that a fair and reasonable benefit of the corporation. There's lots of real world examples of directors and officers claims. One I'll just bring up is an employee alleges wrongful termination and claims management retaliated after reporting compliance concerns. Creditors allege financial mismanagement following operational difficulties. A franchise dispute arises involving alleged failure to comply with franchise operational standards. All those things can lead to directors and officers liability claims. Directors and officers liabilities policies are growing continually, and it's something that's only going to become more and more a part of things that we deal with. One thing I will say is it's important to have a corporate indemnification agreement as a part of your directors and officers liability management. The corporation in that situation was in a corporate indemnification agreement. The corporation will protect you for suits brought against you as a result of your position, as long as you've acted honestly, in good faith, and in the best interest of the corporation. Now, directors and officers can rely on that to some degree, but what if the company or the organization involved in bankruptcy or legal restrictions prevent them from indemnifying the directors and officers? Then there's nowhere for that indemnification to come from, unless there's a directors and officers liability policy in place. Next, let's talk about what directors and officers policies typically cover. Most policies are structured in three major sections. You should see them here on your screen. Side A coverage is for the individual directors and officers, but only for non-indemnifiable losses. First dollar coverage and no retention. Remember, side A is for the individual directors and officers. Side B is for reimbursement coverage for the entity when it indemnifies the director. So it pays the business back when it indemnifies the directors and officers. And it's most commonly used insuring agreement retention applies. So don't forget that. Side C coverage is for the entity itself. Claims made against the entity. And there is a retention deductible that applies to that. So again, side A is for direct coverage for the individual directors and officers. Side B is to reimburse the entity for when it indemnifies the directors and officers. And side C is to cover the claims directly against the entity, but there is a deductible on both side B and side C. Any questions at this point? I know that can be a little confusing. Okay, hearing none, we'll move on to the next slide. What does D&O insurance do? It protects the assets of a company's directors and officers, the personal assets. It protects the company's assets. It provides reimbursement to the organization to indemnify the directors and officers for their losses. And it helps the company monitor and provide defense costs associated with responding to lawsuits. And again, those kind of things are ever growing. I don't think we're going to see a situation or a future where that goes down. It's just my personal opinion. I want to talk just a second now about some key exclusions and coverage gaps. Common exclusions, intentional fraud. Insurance companies are going to 99 times out of 100 are not going to cover these things. Intentional fraud, criminal acts, prior known claims, they're not going to sign on for that. Bodily injury claims, that's going to be your general liability or professional liability. Property damage claims, that's property insurance. Professional malpractice claims, that's your professional liability insurance, and you guys all know about that. Cyber-related incidences, unless it's a part of the management liability policy that we mentioned earlier, and wage and hour violations. Those things are meant to be covered elsewhere, and so you're not going to see those as a part of your director's and officer's liability coverage. I'll say this too, not all directors and officers liability policies are the same. In fact, they're generally pretty different. I think with it, what the point I would make here is that make sure you find a trusted advisor that can cover the key points and the key exclusions and the key benefits of each policy so that it matches up with your particular business and or organization so that you get the bang that you're looking for from the above. Let's talk about why do you buy D&O coverage? Individual directors and officers' personal assets are on the line. I know I've served on several boards of directors and currently still serve on one. And my first thing before I ever agreed to serve is, do you have directors and officers and what's your retention? Because I want to know how much exposure am I taking on? Just by serving on that board, again, you're taking on personal liability and any decisions that you make as a member of that board of directors or as an officer can cause you to be held personally liable. And I can tell you for certain that attorneys are now seeking to make their claim in a way that they can bring directors and officers liability coverage into play. And not only that, go after the personal assets of those directors and officers, because the larger bucket of money that an attorney can find in a situation to bring a claim, have better chances of them actually collecting for their client, which is what their job is, not giving them a difficult time. I mean, that's what they're called to do. So as they make their claim, you can bring them to the court. They're looking for a way to bring other assets, personal assets, or of the board of directors, or other assets that may be other places to increase their opportunities of a recovery. So that's how that works. If you have questions, please reach out to me on that. Companies will have a difficult time attracting qualified individuals to their boards without directors and officers. I wouldn't want to serve. It's one of those things where you're taking on additional liability and you don't have any idea what the decisions you may be making in the future and what the long-reaching consequences of those decisions are, and how does that correspond to the lawsuits or judgments that you may be subject to. So I would just say, if you ever serve on a board, as far as a board of directors or serve as an officer for a company, know that there's directors and officers liability coverage in place, because not every business has it. And I'm guessing that most private home agencies don't have it, which is why we're having this webinar to start with. And just again, for a little review, directors and officers liability coverage, it protects against risks that are not covered by general liability or professional liability. and it protects your organization from and its board members and executives from costs created by legal liabilities. So there's lots of reasons to carry directors and officers liability coverage, but the biggest is your balance sheet, protect your directors and officers from personal liability. Trends, directors and officers claims in healthcare and home care. Over the last several years, we've seen increasing management liability exposures across healthcare and home care industries. Some of the major drivers include staffing shortages, wage pressure. We've all seen those things, right? Increased employment litigation, regulatory scrutiny, data privacy concerns, financial pressures on providers, increased documentation requirements. Those continue to get more and more. Higher expectations from families and referral partners. I really have seen some amazing claim examples of the expectations that family members have on the caregivers. I won't get into it because you got me know some of the persons involved if I do, but it's amazing how much a family member may expect from a caregiver or from your home care agency or right at home. So just know that more and more and more is expected of you as a home care agency owner. With that, you're bringing on more liability, even if sometimes you don't realize it. And again, it mentions plaintiffs' attorneys are increasingly naming executives individually in lawsuits. I can't stress enough that's a major growing thing. We think about personal injury attorneys when we think about lawsuits, but there's a lot of directors and officers lawsuits and claims that are being presented every day too. I'll talk just a minute about what people think about directors and officers insurance coverage, especially when I think about right at home. I think about right at home requires you guys to carry a lot of insurance, and rightfully so. But first thing I would think about if I was a franchisee is, well, they're not requiring you to have that. Do I really need it? And I'm not telling you that everyone does. I will just say that it's amazing how big a difference it can make when these kind of things are overlooked. So if you have assets to protect and if you've had success in your business or elsewhere, you don't want to see your personal assets exposed, maybe we should have a conversation, because it's a gap that's overlooked a lot. I mean, I think it's something that, at the very least, you should have a conversation with your advisors and their opinion on it, because they know you hopefully better than anybody else from an exposure standpoint, what you're trying to protect. They should be very aware of that, and they should be going ahead of you to try to protect you in that situation. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Sources of D&O claims. It's amazing how many things that can result in directors and officers liability claims, but shareholders and investors and partners and members, mergers, acquisitions, constantly seeing mergers and acquisitions, financial performance not being where it should be, executive compensation, getting out of where it should be, stock or other offerings, conflict of interest, bankruptcy, inadequate or inaccurate disclosure, financial reporting. That's a big one. That can result in a director and officer claim probably as quick as anything. I would say the two things I see there, three maybe, mergers and acquisitions, financial performance, and financial reporting. Well, bankruptcy too. Those things result in claims from directors and officers liability. Customers, clients, and consumer groups, extension of credit, refusal of credit, debt collection, deceptive trade practices, contract disputes, all the time. See that one. Restraint of trade, dishonesty, and cost quality of products or services. Huge exposures to directors and officers liability claims. Other things, third-party claims I see that kind of result in directors and officers claims. Antitrust, copyright infringement, business interference, competitor disputes. You'll see vendors that will get into situation there, and it causes business to be restrained. Prospective acquisitions, Company defamation, that's one that you see from time to time. And then, of course, another big one, a huge one actually, is regulatory or government issues. So there's lots of opportunities for directors and officers liability claims there. We work closely with our healthcare and home care organizations to evaluate management liability. We review these policies. We've actually got experts that all they do is directors and officers liability and employment practices liability. We can tell you what your exposure is, and the situation that you have may result in a claim. If you ever want to talk about a situation and just see if you think there's a possibility for your organization to come under suit, or maybe possibility for something to lead to a claim, or you just want to talk about things that you've thought about before that have taken place, and see if that's an exposure for a director's and officer's liability claim, feel free to reach out to me. The next slide is going to have my information, and if you want to, just feel free to reach out to me directly. Should have all my contact information. There it is, my phone number, my office number, and my email address. Of course, our website's there. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me directly. At this time, I'll give just a moment for anybody on the webinar to ask any questions. And please let me know if you have any questions. Hearing none or seeing no hands raised in the chat room, I'm going to assume that at this time all our hearts are at ease, and there's no need for any questions on directors and officers at this time. Please feel free to reach out to me directly with anything that you may have, and hope you guys have a wonderful Tuesday afternoon.